Hope if you're traveling, you'll be safe and you'll have a good week. Um, if you haven't already, please turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 8. This is going to be a relatively short lesson because it's going to focus on only one chapter, but it's a pivotal chapter, and didn't want to rush through it. I didn't want to rush into the next section, which is I think has an import of its own. But anyway, 1 Samuel chapter 8, we have Samuel in charge as Israel's judge. And unlike some of his predecessors, Samuel has been this outstanding, upright judge. Basically, God listens to him. He really is God's agent. He speaks what God tells him to speak, and he abides by it. And as an earlier chapter or verse put it, God let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. He was that righteous guy. And very, very good, very righteous time. Also want to mention real quickly that I think it's great that on Wednesday nights, if you're in that class or following along online, we are studying, or Jason is studying, the book of Judges. And we've talked a little bit about the book of Judges and basically how this was, it was a big story, long story short, it's a period in Israel's history where Israel would go through these cycles of disobedience and falling away from God, and God allowed things to happen to them where things got bad enough, they were persecuted by their enemies badly enough. They would cry out. God would rise up a judge that would rescue them and govern over them and take care of them. As you might guess, when you look at this period of judges and who the judges are, the judges were not a permanent form of government. They did not have this kind of bureaucracy that you might see in a present-day government. Nowhere near that. And the proof of that is that when the judges died, there was no one to take their place. It was not necessarily a hereditary title. It's not something that you could pass on. And the proof of that was when they died, things basically started falling apart again. People started doing what they felt like doing and falling away from God. And the cycle would repeat. You've heard the phrase rinse and repeat. That could describe Israel back in these days. They would go through the same cycle of they disobey God. Things would get bad enough. God would allow their enemies to really whomp up on them and make their lives miserable to the point where they would cry out to God to rescue them. God would do it, and they would have this period of righteousness, or as close to righteousness as they could come to. Well, that was the period of Judges. What Jason talked about and taught last Wednesday, the first couple of chapters of Judges, envision that period, and it's now 400 years later. We're on the tail end of the era of the Judges here in Samuel chapter 8. We're on the tail end of Samuel's reign as the judge of Israel. In fact, he's going to be the final judge of Israel, as it turns out, for various reasons, as we'll find out in this chapter. But Samuel's had a good run. He's been a righteous judge. He has the approval of God. He has this great relationship with the Lord. But as chapter 8 opens, it says, when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders or judges. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second son was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. Now, maybe Samuel was looking ahead. Maybe he was thinking, okay, instead of going through this crazy cycle over and over and over again, why don't I see if I can make this period of this position of judge somewhat permanent and ongoing and hold things together? If that was his effort, if maybe he was, I want to make sure that my sons are taken care of, all good all good intentions and all good reasons, but it just didn't turn out that way. Remember the experience that Eli had with his two sons and how that turned out. You're seeing something somewhat similar, maybe not as severe as the behavior of Eli's sons, but bad enough where it's noted, verse 2 or verse 3. Samuel's sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain. They accepted bribes. They perverted justice. They turned out to be pretty bad at this judging thing. And you can be pretty bad when you're looking the other way, when people are doing wrong, when, hey, if I slip you a couple of 100 shekels, maybe you'll overlook this. Oh, yeah. Anyway, stuff like that, yeah, it's a perversion of justice. The right is not being done. And any kind of citizen of Israel seeing that going on had every right to be upset about their behavior and saying this is unacceptable conduct for our leaders. Something's got to be done about it. Yes. And apparently not. A proud tradition that went on. I hope you were able to hear what Darren said, but let me summarize. The problem, it wasn't bad enough that that Samuel's sons were behaving badly, but that they were doing it so openly, and it's almost like they didn't care. Now, apparently, it wasn't so bad as to suffer the same kind of judgment as Eli's sons did, but it was bad enough. Something had to be done about it. And you have to kind of feel sorry for Samuel. Even a man after God's own heart, or, God's own man like Samuel, can slip up. Maybe that, the parental pride. Oh, look at my sons. Yeah, they'd be great in this position. And you can be a little bit blind in that case to the shortcomings of other people's personalities. And so that it comes perhaps as a surprise and a shock to you when that kind of behavior shows up. But the damage has been done. The leadership of Israel, basically the elders, and the elders here are the wise men, the older men who are in positions of influence within the 12 tribes of Israel. They come together to Samuel at Ramah, verse 4, and they said to him, "You're old." And that's probably pretty obvious because Samuel being a Nazarene or a Nazarite, basically you cannot cut your hair. You can't even trim your beard for the period that you're going to be a Nazarite. For Samuel, it's a lifelong thing. So it wasn't like, okay, 1 year and I'm done. No, it's for his entire life. So you can imagine what his hair looked like, what his beard looked like, and of course, how it changed color through the years. Obvious sign that he's not getting any younger. He's no longer a spring chicken. You get my drift. They come to him and say, "Samuel, buddy, we love you, but you're getting old and older. And there's a problem here. Your sons do not follow your ways." Check. We got a problem here and it needs a solution. Here's our solution. Now appoint a king to lead us, to judge us. We need a super judge. We need a king like all the other nations have. Well, gee, that sounds good. You look around you and every other nation has a king, or, to qualify, an earthly king, someone with flesh and blood. All we have are these piddly judges that, rule and die and go away, and, it's back to the frontier days. Give us a king. All the other nations have a king. Well, there's nothing really wrong in what they were requesting, because if you go back and read the Mosaic Law, there are provisions for Israel eventually having a king. And you go to Deuteronomy chapter 17, Moses lays out some certain rules and regulations. Hey, when you get a king, this is what he needs to do. These are the things he needs to do. These are the things he needs to avoid doing. You know, he needs to study the law, needs to have a handwritten copy so he can consult it at whenever he needs to. He should not be raising a big army or lots of chariots and keep horses and all that stuff, you know, because I'm his ultimate military force. So nothing wrong with, hey, we would like to have a king. The problem is the reason why they asked for it. We want a king not because it's in keeping with God's will, not because it's in keeping with God's timeline. We want a king because all the other nations have a king. Gee, you know, if you've ever been a parent, or if you've ever been a teenager, and I suspect most of us have, this argument kind of sounds a little familiar, right? You know, they're in the back seat arguing. Moab has a king. Edom has a king. Egypt has a king. Well, they have a pharaoh, but it's the same thing as a king. We want a king. Why can't we have a king? Not because they're following the will of God. In fact, if you look at it, they're kind of rejecting God. They're saying, we don't have faith enough, we don't trust God enough to take care of us, to lead us. God, who is their ultimate king. That's a little that's a little factoid that they have, for some reason, overlooked. You know, who was it who just one lesson ago or last week in the last chapter, God created this big thunderclap and it sent the Philistines into a panic? Didn't bother the Israelites at all, but because of what God had done, the Israelites were able to rout the Philistines and win a decisive victory and take back some of their cities. Hey, that should have been that was a powerful lesson, but, like a lot of powerful lessons, more often than not, we forget them. Israelites have obviously forgotten them, and now they feel like they've been cheated out of what they've got coming to them. So after probably a day or longer, or however long the meeting lasted, of Samuel being ragged about, hey, we need a king, we need a king, we need a king, and we need one now. You can almost hear the chat. What do we want? We want a king. When do we want it? Now! That's probably that kind of chant. That's when it originated back then. Little sit-ins and, that Samuel had to step through to get into the tabernacle, his house or whatever. The story continues, verse 6. When they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord. Good move. Whenever you're upset about something, take it to the Lord in prayer. You got to talk to God about it, because that's really the only way you can work through problematical issue. Kind of makes you wonder. Anyway, and the Lord responds to him. He says, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they've rejected, but they've rejected me as their king. I'm their ultimate king, but that doesn't matter anything to them. They want a king. They've just got their heart set on a human king. What's this thing about royalty? I don't know if I can call this up. We'll try. But, even today, we have this fascination about royalty. There's even a magazine called Royalty Monthly. And how they come up with enough material to fill an issue every month, I'm not sure. But it's mostly about, and it looks like it's mostly about the British monarchy. But people have this fascination about royalty. It's, hey, how's the queen doing? Or in this case, how's the new king doing? And what's going on with all the princes and all the turmoil? It's just, there are publications that can cut down entire forests in order to provide, to print the issues on stuff like that. A fascination with royalty has been, apparently, it's nothing new to our culture. It's existed over time. And so it is. God is saying, hey, Samuel, don't feel so bad. Don't take it personally. I get this stuff from them all the time. I know how you feel, buddy. Been there, done that. And as God explains, verse 8, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. It's just more the same with these people. They keep forgetting who really takes care of them, who feeds them, who sustains them, who gives them life. And they go chasing after something else that will ultimately not satisfy. But this is what they want, and this is what they're insisting on. Now, verse 9, now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. Sometimes when God answers your prayers and gives you what you've been hammering him for, maybe it's not the best thing in the world. He'll ultimately give it to you if you keep nagging him about it. But it's not necessarily going to be the answer to all your dreams. It's not going to be the thing that gives you ultimate happiness. And in fact, it may open up a whole new set of problems. And this is what God is warning. Yeah, okay, they keep asking for a king, and they've been insistent about it. I'm going to give it to them. But first, Samuel, tell them what they're going to get. Tell them about the side effects. It's kind of like, some of these TV channels are just loaded with commercials for certain medications. And, all these medications can do all these wonderful things, take care of all your problems. But because there are certain legal liabilities we have to avoid, we need to tell you about the side effects. Oh, yes. Sudden death has been recorded among some users of Crocalux. But hey, and all your internal organs may shut down and you may go blind, but hey, Crocalux is exactly what you need for that case of chronic hangnail. Yes, just a small chance. Isn't? And the commercial, while they're saying all this, they have all these pictures of all these happy people laughing and dancing and running in the fields and having picnics and doing somersaults. Oh man, just what could possibly go wrong? Well, they probably didn't have a commercial like that back then, but God says, you tell them the side effects anyway, which is what Samuel does. Verse 10, Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. Now, maybe, this is not recorded, but maybe he said, there is going to be one good thing about having a king, having your own king. When you're in the checkout counter at the local HEB and you look at the cover or the current issue of People Weekly and the picture of the king on the cover, that'll be your king. And, it won't be Egypt's Pharaoh or one of his kids. It'll be your own king. Something to be proud of. But let me tell you what else comes with this package. Tell them what they've won. Well, these are the side effects of having a king. When I went through this, the way I counted it out, it comes to 7 side effects. Gee, 7? What happens when we see 7 things listed in the Bible? Anyway, Samuel continues, this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights, and he will claim them as his rights because he's the king. He will take your sons. Number one, he'll take your sons, he'll draft them, he'll force them into military service or involuntary servitude. He'll make them serve with his chariots and horses, do things that a godly king was not supposed to have. And they will run in front of his chariots. Hope they're good runners. Gee, if they trip or if they're a little bit too slow, too bad. But yeah, they'll run in front of his chariots, for a good show, to announce the king, make a big party about, hey, the king's in town. The king is going out of town. The king is going over to the local grocery store to, pick up some shampoo for the queen. It's little things like that. Yeah, your sons are going to serve with his military. They're going to do weird things like running in front of his chariots. Some of your sons he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s. Yeah, maybe they'll get some respectable positions here. Something that you couldn't provide for yourself, but that's not a done deal. It's not a guarantee. Others he's going to assign to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. Yeah, the vast majority very likely, will be forced into these anonymous jobs, harvesting, basically farming his fields, harvesting the crops that aren't theirs, and making weapons of war for him. Okay, he's taken your sons. Guess what else he's going to take? Verse 13, he's going to take your daughters. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. So, you're going to lose your sons and daughters to the king's service. That's not all. Number 3, he's going to take the best of your fields and your vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. What used to be yours won't be yours anymore. Oh, he won't take necessarily everything, but probably that beautiful field, that beautiful property that's been in your family all this time, it's going to be claimed by the government because it's pretty and it looks valuable and expensive, and he wants it. And it'll wind up in the hands of the local bureaucrat. Not only that, number 4, he'll take 1/10 of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. You ever hear anything called taxes? You're going to find out what taxes are like. Yes. Oh, and that's not all. Hey, there's more. Side effect number 5, verse 16. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. Man, that's a nice looking herd over there. Yeah, I really need that. Thanks for loaning it to me. We'll get back to you. Yeah. So if you're a farmer or rancher, you're going to lose at least a good chunk of your cattle, and very likely the best cattle and livestock, plus your hired servants. But let's say you're a shepherd. We've seen all those westerns about cattle ranchers and sheep herders, how they didn't get along because basically the livestock just doesn't mesh. Cattle and sheep. Well, I don't do cattle, but I do sheep, so I'm safe from all this. Not so much. Number 6, he will take 1/10 of your flocks, and if that is not bad enough, just as he has taken just about everything or tapped everything that's in your possession, that's not enough. Side effect number 7, you yourselves will become his slaves. You think life is bad right now? It ain't bad enough. You're going to find out what it's like to have a king rule over you, where you basically just don't have a free life of your own. Verse 18, when that day comes, you'll cry out for relief from the king you've chosen. Now, maybe they didn't choose a particular king, but they have chosen to have a king. So a king they're going to have. Whether they like the guy or not, they're setting the mechanism in motion where you got a king, you're going to get a king, and the day will come. Well, you will regret having a king, but by then it'll be too late to do it because you'll cry out for relief, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. Well, this is all rather sobering. I guess because it wasn't sobering enough. It's sobering for us to read this, and it's pretty grim news. And apparently, while Samuel is telling all this stuff, apparently there is this commercial of kings and queens frolicking in the field and dancing around, because the people are not moved at all. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, fine. The people refused to listen to Samuel. Verse 19 says, no, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, which is what we want to be. We want to be like every other nation. Small problem with that. God didn't want Israel to be like every other nation. They were to be an exception to the rule. They were to be this shining star, ideally, that would show what serving the one true living God would be like. Israelites just don't get it. Oh, give us a king. We want a king like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and go out before us and fight our battles. Even though that's exactly what God has been doing for them all this time. When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. I like what the King James translation says. He repeated it in the ears of the Lord. His lips to God's ear, so to speak. Of course, God has heard it. God's listening to Samuel, and he answers, listen to them and give them a king. Make them a king. They want it, they'll get it. And eventually they'll regret it. But I'm going to give them what they've asked for because they've insisted on it. So Samuel said to the Israelites, everyone, go back to your hometown, which was basically, okay, problem solved. God's going to give you what you've asked for. And you'll see and hear about the results soon. And that's the end of chapter 8. Relatively short chapter, lots of import here, because this is a pivotal moment for Israel. Up to this time, basically, God has been their ruler and will continue to be, but with or without the presence of a judge, God was watching over them, and those who were fearful, who were reverent, who wanted to obey God, had that good relationship with him. Things are going to change. Israel will be different, and in some cases, Israel will be this very, very powerful nation at one point in time. God will give them a king. It very well may have been God's plan to eventually give them a king, but because of the way they're going about this, their insisting on a king and not really caring about what God thinks, not consulting with God. They've just made up their minds, we want a king, we want a king, we want a king, we want a king. God gives them a king, not necessarily the kind of king that he intended, but they're going to get one, as we find out. So 3 takeaways, I think. before we continue on with the story of Samuel and the Israelites. Number one, just like Israel, we're called to be different. We're not just like everyone else. God never intended us to be just like everybody else in the world. We're in the world, but we're not supposed to be of the world. Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, he says, do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Don't follow the norms, the standards, the mores of this world, because they are ultimately disappointing. They will let you down. God has a particular standard, and that standard is there for a reason. And ultimately, those who stick with the standard are never disappointed. Number two, when we're obeying God, don't take rejection personally. Memo to Samuel, who apparently got his feelings hurt. When, Samuel, we don't want your sons in charge anymore. Oh, by the way, we want a king. Samuel apparently at some point or other, to some degree, took it very, very personally, to the point where God had to reassure him, hey, look, don't take it personally. It's not you they're putting down. It's me. This is what this is all about. It's ultimately a lack of faith in me and what I have been doing for them. That's going to happen to us if we are diligent in obeying God and carrying out His will. We will encounter situations like that where the situation, maybe the people involved, make us feel bad. Don't let it happen to you. And then the third thing is be careful what you ask for. God may just give it to you. And it may not turn out to be the thing that you've always hoped and desired for. It may not be the answer to all your prayers and desires and fulfillment of your life. God, if you insist, God may actually answer you and give you that thing you're asking for, but it will be more to test you. And it may be one of those things where you realize, hey, there are some awful side effects to what I have this. I got what I asked for, but it may actually have solved a problem for me, but it's created all these other problems that I have to deal with now. What do I do now? A lot of stuff that we ask God for is not bad in and of itself, but we need to be sensitive to His timing and not to insist on things. Yes, God, I would love to have such and such and such, but your will be done, and in your way and in your timing. That's how we should ask for stuff. So that's the lesson today. As I say, this is a pivotal point in our story. Next week, we're going to begin a series of lessons that I like to call Better Call Saul. And so, if you will, please read chapters 9 through 11. That's going to be the focus of our study for next week. I want to wish everybody a wonderful Thanksgiving later this week. Please eat lots of turkeys, or turkeys. If you're hungry enough, do it. Please watch the Cowboys game, and have that nap that the endorphins will basically trigger in you. Just when you start getting sleepy, don't fight it. Just take a nap, unless of course you're driving. Sleeping while driving, not a good idea. And otherwise, Lord willing, we'll see you back next Sunday. Okay? Trip to something or other. Tryptophan, yes. Wonderful tryptophan for all your friends. Yes. No Bible study Wednesday night. That's right. Spend time with your family. And hopefully there are no side effects to tryptophan, but if there are, we'll discuss them next Sunday. So, Lord willing, see you next week.